Sarah Martinez had been walking through the farmer's market on that crisp October morning when she heard the elderly woman's trembling voice. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman stood beside a small wooden crate, her weathered hands clutching a handwritten sign that read, "Dog for sale, $9." Inside the crate sat the most beautiful golden retriever Sarah had ever seen. The dog's coat shimmered like spun gold in the morning sunlight, and his eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old, clearly well-trained and healthy. Dogs like this usually sold for hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. They're selling this dog for $9? Sarah murmured to herself, unable to believe what she was seeing. Mrs. Whitman noticed Sarah's interest and approached with slow, careful steps. Her face was etched with deep lines of sorrow, and her eyes were red from crying. She wore a faded floral dress that had seen better days, and her silver hair was pulled back in a loose bun. "His name is Buddy," Mrs. Whitman said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's a good boy, the best boy anyone could ask for." Sarah knelt down beside the crate and extended her hand toward Buddy. The dog immediately moved closer, his tail wagging gently as he nuzzled her palm. His fur was incredibly soft, and she could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. "Why are you selling him for so little?" Sarah asked, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. Mrs. Whitman's eyes filled with tears again. "My husband passed away 3 months ago," she began, her voice breaking. "Harold loved this dog more than anything in the world. They were inseparable. Buddy would follow him everywhere, sleep by his bedside, and they'd spend hours together in the garden." The old woman paused to wipe her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "I thought I could keep him after Harold died. I really tried. But my arthritis has gotten so bad and I can barely take care of myself anymore. The landlord says I have to move to a senior facility and they don't allow pets." Sarah felt her heart breaking for both the woman and the dog. She could see the pain in Mrs. Whitman's eyes, the way she looked at Buddy with such love and regret. It was clear that giving him up was tearing her apart. "I don't care about the money," Mrs. Whitman continued. "I just want him to go to someone who will love him the way Harold did. Someone who will give him the life he deserves." Other people had started to gather around, drawn by the unusual sight of such a valuable dog being sold for practically nothing. Sarah could hear whispers behind her, people questioning whether something was wrong with the animal or if this was some kind of scam. But as Sarah looked into Buddy's eyes and then back at Mrs. Whitman's tear-stained face, she knew this was genuine. This was a woman facing one of the hardest decisions of her life, and she was putting her beloved pet's welfare above everything else. "I'll take him," Sarah said without hesitation. Mrs. Whitman's face lit up with a mixture of relief and sadness. "Really, you'll give him a good home?" "I promise," Sarah replied, already reaching for her wallet. As Sarah handed over the $9, Mrs. Whitman knelt down beside Buddy one last time. She whispered something in his ear that Sarah couldn't quite hear, kissed the top of his head, and then stood up slowly. "There's something else," Mrs. Whitman said, reaching into her purse. "Harold always carried this with him." She pulled out a small worn leather journal. He wrote in it every day about Buddy, about their adventures together. "I thought maybe Buddy's new family should have it." Sarah accepted the journal with reverence, feeling the weight of the memories it contained. As she loaded Buddy into her car and drove away from the farmer's market, she had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to change not just her life, but the lives of everyone in their small town of Millbrook. 3 days after bringing Buddy home, Sarah discovered something extraordinary about Harold's journal. She had been sitting in her living room watching Buddy explore his new surroundings when she decided to read through some of the entries. What she found made her hands tremble with excitement and disbelief. Harold Whitman hadn't just been writing about daily walks and dog treats. The journal contained detailed maps, coordinates, and cryptic notes about locations throughout Millbrook and the surrounding countryside. On page after page, Harold had documented places he and Buddy had visited, but these weren't ordinary hiking spots or parks. One entry from 6 months ago caught Sarah's attention. "Buddy led me to the old Miller property again today. He scratched at the same spot near the large oak tree for 20 minutes. There's definitely something there. The metal detector confirms it. Tomorrow I'll bring proper tools." Another entry, dated just 2 weeks before Harold's death, was even more intriguing. "Found 3 more items today thanks to Buddy's nose. The dog has an incredible ability to locate things buried underground." Dr. Peterson at the university confirmed the coins are from the 1800s, colonial period artifacts, worth more than I ever imagined. Sarah's heart raced as she continued reading. Harold had discovered that Buddy possessed an unusual talent for finding buried historical artifacts and treasures. The journal contained photographs of coins, jewelry, old bottles, and other items that Buddy had helped uncover throughout Millbrook. The most shocking entry was on the very last page Harold had written. Buddy found something big today at the old Riverside Church Cemetery. Not just coins this time, something metal, large, and deep. Might be connected to the town's founding families. Need to research more before digging. This could be the discovery that changes everything for Eleanor and me. Sarah realized that Harold had died before he could return to that cemetery. She looked at Buddy, who was now sitting beside her chair, his intelligent eyes seeming to study her reaction to the journal. Could it really be true? Did this dog have some kind of supernatural ability to find buried treasure? The next morning, Sarah decided to test Harold's claims. She drove to Miller Park, one of the locations mentioned in the journal. Buddy immediately became alert as soon as they arrived, his nose working overtime as he sniffed the ground with intense concentration. Within minutes, Buddy had led her to a spot near a cluster of pine trees and began digging frantically. Sarah joined him with a small shovel she had brought, and 12 inches down her shovel struck something hard and metallic. She carefully excavated the object and gasped when she saw what Buddy had found. It was an antique silver locket, tarnished but intact with intricate engravings on its surface. Inside the locket was a faded photograph of a young woman and a lock of dark hair. Sarah's hands shook as she held the locket up to the sunlight. This was real. Buddy really did have this incredible ability. But as she looked around the park, she noticed something else. They weren't alone. A man in a dark coat had been watching them from across the park. When Sarah caught sight of him, he quickly turned and walked away, but not before she saw his face clearly. She had seen him before, at the farmer's market 3 days ago, standing in the crowd when she had bought Buddy from Mrs. Whitman. That evening, Sarah received a phone call that sent chills down her spine. The voice on the other end was gravelly and unfriendly. "I know what you found today at the park," the man said, "and I know about the dog. Harold Whitman owed me money, and now his debts belong to whoever has his dog. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, lady." Before Sarah could respond, the line went dead. She looked down at Buddy, who seemed to sense her distress and moved closer to her side. Whatever Harold had discovered and whatever debts he may have left behind, Sarah realized she was now part of something much bigger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. That night, as she lay in bed with Buddy sleeping peacefully beside her, Sarah made a decision. She would find out the truth about Harold's discoveries no matter what dangers lay ahead. But first, she needed to warn Mrs. Whitman about the mysterious caller and find out exactly what kind of trouble Harold had gotten himself into before he died. Sarah arrived at Sunset Manor early the next morning, clutching Harold's journal and the silver locket Buddy had found. Mrs. Whitman was sitting in the common room, staring out the window with a cup of untouched tea growing cold in her hands. When she saw Sarah approach, Mrs. Whitman's face brightened for a moment before clouding over with concern. "Is everything all right with Buddy?" she asked immediately. Sarah sat down beside the elderly woman and gently placed the journal on the table between them. "Mrs. Whitman, I need to ask you about Harold's hobby. Did you know about his treasure hunting?" Mrs. Whitman's eyes widened and she glanced around nervously to make sure no one else was listening. "You found his journal," she whispered. "I was hoping. I thought maybe if I didn't mention it, all that trouble would just go away." "What trouble?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew part of the answer. Mrs. Whitman wrung her hands in her lap. "Harold got involved with some bad people about a year ago. There's a man named Vincent Kozlov who runs a black market antiquities business out of the city. Harold started selling some of his finds to Vincent, but then things got complicated." She paused to take a shaky sip of her tea. Vincent wanted Harold to find something specific, something he claimed was buried somewhere in Millbrook during the Civil War. Harold kept looking, but he never found what Vincent wanted. The debt kept growing because Vincent had given Harold money up front for equipment and promised payments. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was worse than she had imagined. "How much money are we talking about?" $50,000, Mrs. Whitman whispered. Harold borrowed it to buy professional metal detecting equipment and to pay for research into the town's historical records. Vincent said if Harold found what he was looking for, he could keep half the profits. But Harold died before... Her voice trailed off, but Sarah understood. Harold had died before he could find Vincent's treasure or pay back the debt. There's something else, Mrs. Whitman continued. The night before Harold passed away, he told me he had finally figured out where Vincent's treasure was hidden. He said Buddy had led him to the right spot, but it was too dangerous to dig alone. He was planning to contact the police the next day. Sarah showed Mrs. Whitman the locket Buddy had found. The old woman gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. That's beautiful, but it's not what Vincent is looking for. According to Harold's research, Vincent believes there's a chest buried somewhere in Millbrook that contains Confederate gold and documents that could rewrite the town's history. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. She recognized the gravelly voice immediately. Time's up, lady. You've got 24 hours to bring me that dog and everything Harold found, or things are going to get very unpleasant for you and the old woman. This time, Sarah was ready. I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't owe you anything. Vincent's laughter was cold and menacing. You think this is a game? I've been watching you. I know where you live, where you work, and where the old lady is staying. Harold made a deal with me, and now you're going to honor it. The line went dead again, but this time Sarah was prepared. She had recorded the conversation on her phone. She looked at Mrs. Whitman, who had gone pale during the phone call. We need to go to the police, Sarah said firmly, but Mrs. Whitman shook her head frantically. You don't understand. Vincent has connections everywhere. Harold tried to go to the authorities once before, and somehow Vincent found out before Harold even filed the complaint. That's when the threat started getting serious. Sarah realized they were trapped. If they went to the police, Vincent might find out and escalate the situation. But if they didn't, he would keep coming after them. There had to be another way. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of running or hiding, she would use Harold's journal and Buddy's abilities to find Vincent's treasure herself. But she wouldn't give it to him. She would use it as leverage to ensure their safety and expose Vincent's criminal activities. She spent hours studying the journal's final entries, trying to decode Harold's notes about the cemetery discovery. According to his research, the treasure was connected to a Union sympathizer named Colonel Morrison, who had helped runaway slaves escape north during the Civil War. The gold was payment from grateful families and abolitionists, hidden away when Confederate raiders threatened the town. As evening approached, Sarah loaded Buddy into her car and drove toward the old Riverside Church Cemetery. She had no idea that Vincent's men were already there waiting for her, or that her decision to find the treasure would set off a chain of events that would soon have the entire town talking and the State Historical Society rushing to Millbrook with a team of experts. The Riverside Church Cemetery was eerily quiet as Sarah and Buddy made their way through the weathered headstones in the fading daylight. Ancient oak trees cast long shadows across the graves, and Sarah could hear nothing but the crunch of fallen leaves beneath her feet and Buddy's excited panting. According to Harold's journal, the treasure was buried near the Morrison family plot, close to a distinctive angel statue that had been erected in 1863. Sarah found the statue easily, its marble wings spread wide as if protecting the graves below. Buddy immediately became alert, his nose working frantically as he circled the area around the statue. Within minutes, he had zeroed in on a spot about 10 feet from the angel and began digging with intense determination. Sarah was about to join him with her shovel when she heard voices approaching through the trees. Her heart pounded as she recognized Vincent Kozlov's gravelly tone, accompanied by at least 2 other men. She's here, just like I knew she would be, Vincent was saying. Harold's widow told us about the journal before she realized what she was saying. Now we just wait for the dog to do what it does best. Sarah realized she had been set up. Mrs. Whitman hadn't betrayed them intentionally, but Vincent had obviously gotten information from her somehow. Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and activated the voice recording app, then crouched behind the angel statue with Buddy. There she is, one of Vincent's men called out. And the dog's already digging. Vincent emerged from the shadows with 2 large men flanking him. He was shorter than Sarah had expected, with graying hair and expensive clothes that seemed out of place in a cemetery. His smile was cold and predatory. Ms. Martinez, I presume. You've saved us a lot of time and effort. Now why don't you and your talented dog move away from that hole so my associates can finish the job? Sarah stood up slowly, keeping Buddy close to her side. I don't think so. This is public property and you have no right to be here. Vincent's laughter echoed off the headstones. Rights? You think this is about rights? Harold Whitman owed me $50,000 plus interest. That dog is collateral on the debt, and anything he finds belongs to me. That's not how the law works, Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The law, Vincent said, pulling out a folded document from his jacket, says otherwise. This is a legally binding contract Harold signed. Everything his dog finds within the Millbrook area belongs to me until the debt is paid in full. Sarah's heart sank as she saw the official-looking paperwork, but she noticed something Vincent hadn't counted on. Buddy had continued digging during their conversation and had uncovered something significant. The dog was now pawing at what appeared to be the edge of a metal container. Looks like we hit the jackpot, one of Vincent's men said, pushing past Sarah to examine Buddy's discovery. But as they began to excavate the area more thoroughly, something unexpected happened. The metal container Buddy had found wasn't filled with gold or Confederate treasures. Instead, it contained dozens of old photographs, letters and documents wrapped in oiled cloth. Vincent grabbed the container and rifled through its contents, his face growing redder with each item he examined. What is this garbage? Where's the gold? Where are the coins? Sarah picked up one of the photographs that had fallen to the ground. It showed a group of African-American families standing in front of what looked like a train station. On the back, someone had written, Safe Passage North 1864, Colonel Morrison's Underground Railroad Station. Suddenly, Sarah understood. Harold's research had been correct about Colonel Morrison helping escaped slaves, but there never was any buried treasure. The real treasure was historical evidence of Millbrook's role in the Underground Railroad, something far more valuable to historians and the community than gold or coins. You've been looking for something that never existed, Sarah told Vincent. Harold figured that out before he died. That's why he was going to contact the authorities. He realized he'd been manipulated into treasure hunting for something that was never real. Vincent's face contorted with rage. That's impossible. I have sources, historical records that prove the gold was buried here. Forged sources, a new voice said from behind the trees. And you're all under arrest. Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged from the darkness with 4 deputies, all with their weapons drawn. Sarah had never been so relieved to see law enforcement in her life. We've been investigating Vincent Kozlov's operation for 6 months, Sheriff Bradley explained as his deputies handcuffed Vincent and his associates. Harold Whitman contacted us 3 days before he died. He'd figured out that Vincent was using forged historical documents to trick people into treasure hunting, then stealing whatever they actually found. As the police led Vincent away, he turned back to Sarah with fury in his eyes. This isn't over. That dog still owes me money and I'll collect one way or another. But Sarah was no longer afraid. She had something much more powerful than Vincent's threats. She had the truth. She had evidence of his crimes. And she had discovered something that would make Millbrook famous throughout the state. The documents and photographs Buddy had found would prove that their small town had been a crucial stop on the Underground Railroad, a fact that had been lost to history until now. This discovery would bring historians, tourists, and recognition to Millbrook in ways no one could have imagined. 2 weeks after Vincent's arrest, Millbrook was buzzing with activity like never before. News of Buddy's discovery had spread throughout the state, bringing historians, journalists, and curious visitors from hundreds of miles away. The small town that most people had never heard of was suddenly on the front page of newspapers and featured on television news programs. Dr. Patricia Williams, the state's leading expert on Underground Railroad history, had arrived with a full archaeological team to properly excavate and document the cemetery site. What they found exceeded everyone's expectations. The metal container Buddy had uncovered was just the beginning. Using ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation techniques, the team discovered an entire network of hidden chambers and tunnels beneath Riverside Church that had been used to shelter escaped slaves during their journey north. This is one of the most significant Underground Railroad discoveries in the region, Dr. Williams announced at a press conference held in Millbrook's town hall. The Morrison family and several other local families created an elaborate system to help freedom seekers reach safety. These documents and photographs provide unprecedented insight into how the operation worked. Sarah stood at the back of the crowded room with Buddy by her side, still amazed at how much their lives had changed. The dog who had been sold for $9 was now being hailed as a hero by historians and the media. But the most touching moment came when Mrs. Whitman, now staying temporarily with her niece in town, approached the microphone during the question and answer session. "I just want everyone to know," she said, her voice stronger than Sarah had ever heard it, "that my Harold would be so proud of what Buddy has accomplished. Harold always said this dog was special, and now the whole world knows it too." The audience erupted in applause, and Sarah saw tears of joy streaming down Mrs. Whitman's face. For the first time since Harold's death, she looked truly happy. After the press conference, Dr. Williams approached Sarah with an interesting proposal. "We'd like to hire you and Buddy as consultants for our ongoing research. Buddy's ability to locate buried historical artifacts is truly remarkable, and we have dozens of sites throughout the state that could benefit from his talents." Sarah was intrigued, but cautious. What exactly would that involve? "We'd pay you a consulting fee to bring Buddy to various historical sites, where we suspect there might be buried artifacts or structures. Nothing dangerous or illegal, just legitimate archaeological research with proper permits and scientific supervision." The offer was tempting, especially since Sarah had been struggling financially since taking time off work to deal with the Vincent situation. But she had one condition. Mrs. Whitman would have to be involved too. Harold did most of the research that led to this discovery, and she should benefit from Buddy's success. Dr. Williams smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. We'd be happy to include Mrs. Whitman as a historical research consultant. Her knowledge of Harold's work and the local history would be invaluable." That evening, Sarah visited Mrs. Whitman at her niece's house to share the good news. The elderly woman's eyes lit up when Sarah explained the consulting opportunity. "You mean I could help with the research? I could be useful again?" Mrs. Whitman asked, her voice filled with hope. "More than useful," Sarah assured her. "Essential. Harold's journal and research notes are going to help archaeologists understand Underground Railroad operations throughout the entire region." As they talked, Sarah noticed something else that made her heart warm. Mrs. Whitman seemed healthier and more energetic than she had in months. Having a purpose again, being part of something important, had given her new life. But their conversation was interrupted by a phone call from Sheriff Bradley. Vincent Kozlov had been released on bail, and there were reports that he was back in the area. "I don't think he's given up on his claim to Buddy and Harold's discoveries," the sheriff warned. "My advice is to stay alert and don't go anywhere alone until his trial is over." Sarah felt her stomach tighten with worry. Just when everything seemed to be working out perfectly, Vincent was back to cause more trouble. She looked down at Buddy, who seemed to sense her distress and moved closer to her side. "Don't worry," Mrs. Whitman said firmly. "Vincent Kozlov might think he can intimidate us, but he doesn't understand what he's up against. This town has come together around Buddy's discovery, and we're not going to let some criminal take that away from us." Sarah realized Mrs. Whitman was right. Millbrook had changed in the past 2 weeks. The community had rallied around their story, and local businesses were already planning to capitalize on the newfound historical significance of their town. Vincent might be out on bail, but he was outnumbered by an entire town that now saw Buddy as their local hero. Still, as Sarah drove home that night with Buddy sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest challenges were still ahead of them. 6 months later, Millbrook had transformed into a thriving historical destination that attracted thousands of visitors each year. The Underground Railroad Discovery Center, housed in a beautifully restored building next to Riverside Church, had become the town's crown jewel and a source of pride for everyone who lived there. Sarah walked through the center's main exhibit hall with Buddy trotting beside her, both of them wearing matching ID badges that identified them as historical consultants. The walls were lined with the photographs and documents Buddy had discovered, along with detailed explanations of Millbrook's role in helping enslaved people escape to freedom. The centerpiece of the exhibit was a life-sized bronze statue of Buddy, nose to the ground in his characteristic treasure-hunting pose. A plaque beneath the statue read, "In honor of Buddy, whose remarkable abilities led to the discovery of Millbrook's hidden history, and Harold Whitman, whose dedication to historical research made this discovery possible." Mrs. Whitman approached from across the room, where she had been giving a tour to a group of schoolchildren from the neighboring county. At 78 years old, she had found new purpose as the center's head historical interpreter, sharing stories about Harold's research and the families who had risked everything to help others find freedom. The children loved hearing about how Buddy can smell history. Buried in the ground, she told Sarah with a smile. One little girl asked if we could train her pet hamster to do the same thing. Sarah laughed, remembering how skeptical she had been when she first read Harold's journal. Now, after working with archaeological teams across 3 states, she had seen Buddy locate everything from Civil War battlefield artifacts to Native American pottery. His abilities had helped historians make dozens of significant discoveries. Speaking of which, Mrs. Whitman continued, Dr. Williams called this morning. They want us in Virginia next month. There's a plantation site where they suspect there might be hidden slave quarters, and they want Buddy to help locate them. Their consulting business had grown beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. She and Mrs. Whitman now traveled regularly with Buddy, helping archaeological teams and historical societies uncover buried pieces of America's past. The work was fascinating, profitable, and meaningful in ways that Sarah's previous job as a bank clerk had never been. But the best part of their success story was what had happened to Vincent Kozlov. His trial had made national headlines when prosecutors revealed the extent of his antiquities fraud operation. Vincent had been using forged historical documents to trick amateur treasure hunters into searching for non-existent treasures, then stealing whatever legitimate artifacts they actually found. Harold Whitman's research had been the key evidence that brought down Vincent's entire network. The detailed notes in Harold's journal, combined with the recorded phone conversation Sarah had made, proved that Vincent had been running his scam for over 5 years across multiple states. Vincent was now serving a 10-year federal prison sentence for fraud, theft, and interstate transportation of stolen artifacts. The judge had ordered him to pay full restitution to his victims, including the cancellation of Harold's supposed debt. You know, Mrs. Whitman said as they walked toward the center's gift shop, Harold would never have believed all of this would come from his hobby. He just loved spending time with Buddy and learning about local history. Sarah nodded, thinking about how much their lives had changed since that morning at the farmer's market. Do you ever regret selling Buddy to me for $9? She asked. Mrs. Whitman's face grew serious for a moment, then broke into a warm smile. Never. Harold always said that Buddy would find his way to where he was supposed to be. I think this is exactly what he meant. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Buddy appeared beside them carrying his favorite toy, a replica of the metal detector Harold had used. The dog had become something of a celebrity, with his own social media accounts managed by the tourism board and regular appearances at historical education events. But despite all the fame and success, Buddy remained the same gentle, intelligent dog Sarah had met that day at the farmer's market. He still slept beside her bed every night, still got excited about car rides, and still possessed that remarkable ability to find things that had been lost to time. The afternoon sun was setting as Sarah, Mrs. Whitman, and Buddy walked home through the bustling streets of Millbrook. New restaurants and shops had opened to serve the steady stream of tourists, and Sarah could see construction crews working on a new hotel that would accommodate even more visitors. As they passed the farmer's market where it all began, Sarah remembered the elderly woman's trembling voice asking for $9 for her beloved dog. Neither of them could have imagined that this simple transaction would lead to one of the most significant historical discoveries in the region's history, expose a criminal operation, and transform an entire town. But perhaps the most important transformation had been in Mrs. Whitman herself. The lonely, grieving widow had become a confident, respected historian whose knowledge and expertise were sought after by researchers across the country. She had found purpose, community, and joy again. That evening, as Sarah sat in her living room reading the latest archaeological report that featured Buddy's discoveries, she reflected on how a $9 dog had changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone around him. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the most ordinary moments, and sometimes the best investments are the ones made with the heart rather than the head. Buddy settled down beside her chair with a contented sigh, his golden fur gleaming in the lamplight. Tomorrow they would begin their next adventure, helping historians uncover more hidden chapters of America's past. But tonight Sarah was simply grateful for the elderly woman who had trusted her with the most precious thing she owned, and for the remarkable dog who had shown them all that the most valuable treasures are often the ones we never expected to find.